Hello, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. We are on week 4 out of 7 weeks. Today is going to be the last day when we focus on general prayers and blessings, and starting next week, and then for the last 3 sessions, we'll focus specifically on prayers for the high holidays. So just so you know, in terms of kind of what we're doing, starting next week, we'll focus on things that are specifically in the Machzor, the prayer book for the high holidays. What I would like to cover today in terms of grammar, focus on prepositions, and then look at the blessings for Torah reading, the blessing before and after a Torah reading, and then also just a few blessings that are recited on different occasions. As usual, before the end of today, I will put up the PowerPoint and some exercises and a video with me reading through the material slowly so that you can practice reading, and as usual, a few additional vocabulary words. So with that, I am going to share my screen and talk a little bit about prepositions. Now, prepositions in Hebrew, for the most part, are attached to the beginning of words. And so rather than having separate words like we have in English, something is like something's, right? Something is in, to, for, from. Most of the prepositions do not function as independent words, but simply as prefixes that are added in front of words and attached. So if I have the word Torah and I want to say like Torah, I would say ke Torah. If I want to say in Torah, be Torah. If I want to say to or for Torah, I'll say le Torah. So it's just a matter of putting these letters in front of a word without changing anything else about the word, and then you have your preposition. Now, one other thing that is a little tricky with the preposition, so I just want to give you a heads up about it, and this generally comes over time, is that while we learn that generally the preposition bet means in, the truth is that it means a lot of other things as well. So if you are reading a text and you're sure that you understand the words around it, but whenever you say in whatever the word is doesn't seem to make sense, think about how we would say it in English and use that word. So le, for example, can be to, it can be for, sometimes it can mean regarding, while be most of the time is in, sometimes it can mean with, sometimes it can mean as. So prepositions are going to be a lot more fluid in their translation than other basic vocabulary words. Now, the example that I've given you at the very bottom, mean, from, mean is its own word. And so for from, if I want to say from Torah, I can say min Torah. You'll also find sometimes that the nun drops out, this nun Sophie drops out, and just the preposition mem can be then attached to a word. So I could say me Torah, or min, like HaTorah. So you want to just be careful with from. It can be its own word, or it can be attached to the beginning of another word. There are a lot more prepositions that are their own independent words. These are the most common. So some examples, you may be familiar with Shalom Aleichem, peace to you all. So that is al, peace, right? Peace be upon all of you. Tachat means behind, related to tuchis, for those of you who know a little bit of English, the Yiddish, when backside, behind. So there are a lot more, but these are ones that you will see a lot, especially in prayer book Hebrew. Now, so here are some examples. So if I have milchama, which is war, le milchama is going to be to a battle or to war. Sarah, if I put the preposition kaf, ki Sarah, it becomes like Sarah. Or here, shem, which means name, bi shem, in a name. And so here are just examples of how you can take nouns, including proper nouns like personal names and places, and simply attach a preposition right onto the noun itself. Now, there is one other thing that the prepositions can do. The prepositions can attach not just to nouns, but they can make up words on their own. And so, and it depends on the suffix. In the exercises that you will have, I'm going to provide you with a paradigm list, not of everything, but of the 4 most common suffixes that we add to prepositions. So lanu is the preposition lamed plus nu, which indicates us. So I can then do the same. I can take the preposition bet, in, and I can add the suffix nu, and now I have in us. Asher bachar banu, here's our banu. Asher natan lanu, so here's our lanu. So I'm going to give you some examples that you can play with during the week of not just us, but how to say to me and in me, and the second person forms to say to you and in you. So I'll provide you with that paradigm in the exercises. Then just one other piece. This comes from some questions that came up. So a few people have been asking the prefix, just adding the vav, ve, means and. So ve ish, and a man. And some people were noticing that the vav doesn't always have this shva. It's not always ve. Sometimes it's u. Sometimes it's va. So they all mean the same thing. It won't change the meaning. And so if you want, you can just know that there are a variety of vowels that go with the vav that mean and. But if you are curious, the v tends to turn to u for the bump letters. In other words, bet, mem, and pei. Bet, mem, and pei. And if you have a word that begins with a shva, like on aratzot, then instead of ve aratzot, the vowel simply switches to va aratzot. And in all of these cases, the reason why the vowel patterns change is only because of sound and pronunciation. If we were to say v'aratzot 10 times very quickly, you would end up saying va'aratzot because it's just difficult for our mouths to go from v straight into a. So this simply reflects the ways in which our mouths work. Okay, so I will share that with all of you so that you have it. And what I would like to do now is to look at a few new texts for you to practice reading. And I wanted to do the readings for the Torah because, again, those are very, very common, and it doesn't matter what community you're in. It's likely that there'll be a Torah service within, any denomination or non-denomination, and you may be called up, or it's possible that you've wanted to be called up for an aliyah to recite the blessing, and so I'm hoping this will help you with that. So now we're going to look at a few texts. And we're going to start first. Make this a little bit larger. Or not. All right. So here are the Torah blessings. Now, the way that it works, and many of you may be familiar, that you begin with a general call. And you may be familiar with this because of the tune, Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach. Okay, so this is the general call, Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach. And then the congregation would respond with this second line, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. And then you would continue with this line. So before we move to the primary lines, let's just look at what we're doing here with this initial call. So you're called up for an aliyah. Sometimes it's customary that the person who's reading the Torah will show you the word where they're going to start reading in the Torah scroll itself. So if you're wearing a talit, or you can, with a prayer book, you can touch that spot and then kiss your talit and then begin with this recitation. So Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach. We've been learning about Hebrew roots, the concept that 3 letters form a general root. And from that, you can create different forms by adding different suffixes and prefixes and by playing around with the vowel patterns. So our first word here, Baruch, has the same root, the same shoresh as the very common word Baruch. You can see that both of them have a bet, a resh, and a chaf. Here it's a chaf sofit, but bet, resh, chaf has to do with blessing. And so in this form here, this form is actually kind of like a command form. So Baruch means bless. It's a call out. It's a plural command calling for the community to bless. To bless who? Et. Here's our direct object. We've talked about this, right? So bless, direct object marker, Adonai. And then here we have, you can see the same root is embedded here. Bet, resh, chaf, again. This hey is telling us it's ha. The mem is part of a prefix for this present tense form. And so this one means the one who is blessed. So it's y'all bless Adonai, the one who is blessed. So a lot of blessing here. And then the response of the community is, blessed be Adonai, the one who is blessed, le'olam va'ed. We've had this in vocabulary past, in some of our past meetings. Le'olam va'ed means forever. So blessed is Adonai, the blessed one forever, for eternity. And then we move on to the primary blessing that is recited before the chanting of Torah. Now, with this, I did want to bring a few different examples of the blessing, because different communities have been doing different things and wanted to kind of register that. The first one here is the standard traditional one that's used. So we're going to start here, and then I'm going to show you the variations that different movements have been using. And I gave a little extra spacing to the words where there's going to be a little bit of a variation. But let's start with the beginning. So first, I'm just going to read it through. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim Vennatan lanu et Torato Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Okay, so it begins with the standard blessing formula, which is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Right? Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe. Then Asher, in English, you have to be careful about when to use who, when to use whom, when to use that, when to use which. In Hebrew, all of it is just one word, so you don't have to worry about those details. Asher can be who, whom, that, which. Okay, so just one form, it's much easier in Hebrew. So, blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who, Bachar is a verb which means to choose. So who has chosen, and here is our Banu that we talked about before, the preposition be plus us. So who has chosen, literally in us, but you don't have to say in, but who Bachar Banu has chosen us, Mikol, here's our preposition, min, from, attached right onto the word kol, which means everything. So who has chosen us from all, ha'amim, the nations. Okay, so who has chosen, Bachar Banu, us, Mikol, from all, ha'amim. If you're familiar with like Am Yisrael, Am is people or nation, Amim is simply the plural. And we've talked about this plural ending before. Now, the variations that we're going to see have been created by different movements and different communities because of a discomfort that some people have with this idea of chosenness, that God has chosen us from all of the other peoples. And, I'm not going to lecture one way or another. Everyone has different feelings about this concept of chosenness, and this is all fine wherever you land. But I want to show you the second one is what the Reconstructionist movement has done. The third one I've seen in a lot of Reform Sidurim. So in the Reconstructionist Sidurim, they have replaced Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, who has chosen us from all the nations, to Asher, who, Kervanu, Karav means to be close. So, and Nu, us, who brought us close, La'avodato. This comes from avodah, which means service. And here's our preposition, lamed. To his is the suffix at the end, to his service. So in this case, we are blessing God who has brought us close to serving God. So here it's completely changed, and there is no concept of chosenness, but there is the idea that we are blessing God because of the close relationship that we have with God. In a lot of Reform communities, they have changed simply one word from the traditional. So instead of Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, from all the nations, it's Asher Bachar Banu, who has chosen us, Im. Im is the preposition with Ha'amim. So instead of from, who has chosen us from all of the peoples, it's who has chosen us with, along with all of the peoples. So depending on your community, one of these three may be more familiar to you than others, but I wanted to put all of these up for you. And I, on the exercises for this week, I will read each of these slowly so that you can use whichever your community uses or whatever you find yourself drawn to. All right, and then we have a final piece, and the final piece stays the same in all of the versions. So the last piece then is Vennatan, so ve and. Natan is a very common verb that means to give. So, so we're talking still about what God has done. Vennatan, and God gave. Lanu, here's our preposition, plus nu. God has given to us, the direct object, Torato, the Torah, and O here is indicating his. So who has given us his Torah. And then Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah. Blessed are you, Ata, you, Adonai, Noten, the same root as here. It's just, here is the present tense, who gives the Torah. So here the blessing is ultimately about thanking God for having giving us the Torah. You don't have to take this in right now, but I'll just throw it out there in case it's of interest to you. Natan is the past tense, and notain is the present tense. Okay. So the basic idea in this blessing is about blessing and thanking God. I would say that no matter which option you choose, the idea is essentially, thank you that we have the opportunity to engage, that we have the opportunity to engage with the Torah that God has given us. And then, blessed are you, God, who gives the Torah. Okay. After the reading, you recite the following line, and these are, this is the same, I think, in most communities. And so here, after the Torah reading is concluded, then you recite Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, our standard opening, Asher, who Natan Lanu, has given to us, Torat Emet, Torah of truth. Emet is truth. So, Torah of truth, Vechaye Olam Nata Bitochenu, and who has Nata planted, Bitochenu, here's our Be, within us, Chaye Olam, eternal life. I like to read this a little more kind of metaphorically. And then again, the same final blessing, Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. So a lot of the verb natan, giving, which is quite common. Natan is probably among the 20 most common verbs in biblical and in prayer book Hebrew. All right, so again, it would be Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach, the community, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed, and then whichever version, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim Vennatan Lanu et Torato Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. And then after, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet, the true Torah of truth, Vechaye Olam Nata Betochenu, Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. And that is basically that. Okay. Let me just also just kind of put out there that these are not the only 3 versions that exist. I wanted to give you the traditional one, and then a couple of variations, but I'm not including other variations. In some communities, the language, even God language, is changed to the feminine so that the entire blessing is recited with feminine forms for God. So there are a lot of different ways. I wanted to give you what I think are probably the 3 primary versions that are out there. Okay, before I go on to the next, Julie, shall we just take a few questions if there are any?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions.
Okay.
One was about the vowels underneath the preposition letters, and if you could speak to that.
Okay. All right. So the vowels generally will be just shva, bi something, or li something, right? Ki something. They will change if there are, in the same circumstances as the vav, that there will be different vowels under the preposition if the word begins with a guttural letter, if it begins with a shva, the shva vowel. So there are a variety I don't know that it's the best use of our time for me to start going through each of those specific ones at this level.
Okay, bump letters.
Ah, yes, bump for the three letters bet, b, b, mem, and pay. So bump, just to help remember, bet, mem, and pay. That when you have a bet or a mem or a pay that's starting a word, like panim is the word for face, panim. If I want to say and a face, I wouldn't say the panim, I would say u panim. So whenever you encounter a bet, a mem, or a pay, you'll have u rather than the. So bump is just a way of remembering those three consonants.
There seems to be two pronunciations, hamivorach versus hamvorach.
So technically it is hamivorach. When you start reading more quickly, sometimes hamivorach, it can get a little bit swallowed up. So my guess is that even when I'm pronouncing it, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle because of the speed, but technically it's hamivorach. Okay.
And
one more.
This might open a can of worms that I'm not sure you want to address, but asher natan lanu Torah emet, why doesn't the phrase include direct object indicator?
Asher natan lanu
Torah
emet. It's a great question, and if whoever's interested in that, if you can put it into the comments section of the exercises over the week, I will be glad to get into that in more detail.
Oh, and one more request: when you do the share screen, can you zoom in a little bit to make the words bigger?
Sure. Okay. All right, so we're going to spend our last 10 minutes or so looking at some very common blessings. So now we're moving a little bit outside of the Siddur. But again, I think that these are texts that you will encounter or probably do encounter, and the vocabulary is relevant. All right, let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so what I wanted to share with you this week are a few basic blessings, brachot, that are associated with food. And so many of you may be familiar with these, but we are not all. And so I want to make sure that for folks who are newer to Jewish traditions and to Hebrew, that you have an opportunity to get some exposure. So the first blessing is a blessing that is typically recited before having a meal. Technically, it's for a meal in which there is bread. So most of the time when we hear this first blessing, it's because we are blessing challah, right? Either in a community or around a Shabbat table. But traditionally, this would be for any meal where you're sitting down and there's any bread at all in the meal. And so we begin again with our standard formula for blessing, and all of these will have the same standard opening. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. So blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe. And then 4 words, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So I think we've talked about aretz means land. Haaretz means the land. And so hamotzi, motzi comes from the shoresh yud Sadi Aleph. It is connected to Yitziat Mitzrayim. So Yitziat and Hamotzi actually share the same root. So Hamotzi, the verb form here is a little bit complicated. I'm not going to get into this, but it means the one who draws forth, brings forth, lechem, bread, and here is our preposition min, from the land. So hamotzi lechem min haaretz, the one who brings forth bread from the land. And so motzi is also going to be God who has brought forward the people out of Egypt. And that's where you get the same root. You know, I think a lot of people simply kind of jump into this prayer and recite it. And I think it's interesting, and it might be, you know, worth some of your time to think about, you know, why the blessing is phrased this way, right? Who brings forth bread from the land. We're really talking here about agriculture, right? And that and the understanding of God's role in helping seedlings to grow into grains, right? And about the miracle of that kind of growth and birth. The other one that you may be familiar with is what we recite before wine. Again, we're going to start with our same opening, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, and then the three words, Borei, Pri, Hagafen. So Borei is create. The first book of the Bible is called Bereshit. Bara Elohim, God created the world. So who created, Pri means fruit, and Geffen means vine. So in this case, we're blessing God for having created the fruit of the vine. Okay. The word, if it stands by itself, is Geffen for wine. It turns to Gafen under certain circumstances, which I'm not going to get to, but generally if this is the last word in a verse, in a sentence, it goes to, with hey, it goes to Gafen. Now, the other two that I want to share with you are a little less common, but if you are eating something, here we go. If you're having a meal where there's actually no bread, no grain, let's say you are just having some fruit or some vegetables, there are specific blessings that you recite for those specific food categories. And so anything that is grown on a tree, like if you are having an apple, anything that comes from a tree, so primarily fruits, would be Borei Pri Ha'etz, who has created fruit of the tree. Right, so here kind of acknowledging the wonder of fruit coming off of growing kind of within trees. And then the final one for today, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Pri Ha'adama. Adama means ground. So who has created fruit of the ground. So if you pull out a carrot and you're munching on the carrot and you want to give a blessing to acknowledge that, then this is what you would recite. You know, one of the things that I enjoy about this is that you have to know where your food is coming from, right? You have something, And you need to know, did this grow off of a tree? Did this come up from the ground? So it's another way of connecting and thinking a little bit more about our food. But you can also see that the word bore from bara, created, will be on the vocabulary list, and pri, fruit, it will be on the vocabulary for this week. And then again, adama is ground, eitz is tree. Eitz can also mean wood. You have to just determine from the context. And then bore pri hagafen, gefen is a vine. Okay, so I will have these up, read slowly, and then read a little more quickly for those of you who would like to practice these blessings. All right, and maybe time for 1 or 2, 3 questions.
Great. There's a specific question about blessings. Would a watermelon or a squash be from the tree or from the vine or from the ground?
So the only one that gets vine is wine. So something like a pumpkin would be from the ground.
Great. This might have to do with your the exercises. Will the answers from the email that was shared last week be given? Songs, internet? Does that sound familiar? No. Whoever asked that question, if you could specify what that was, that would be great. Any other questions about the Hebrew text? We have more blessing questions. Is there a blessing for meat, chicken, animals?
No, but there is one more that is kind of what a miscellaneous. So if you're eating something that doesn't fall into any of those categories, of course, I think about something like candy, you know, if I'm having a candy bar, which I guess you could argue, well, we won't get into where the chocolate comes from here, but there is another blessing I can add on to the exercises, which is for anything else. But if you're eating a bunch of different things and you have even just a little piece of bread, then bread trumps everything else and includes everything else. So you don't have to say a blessing for each of those food items.